Welcome to episode 2 of the read-along book club of Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. Things are picking up, aren't they? Oh yes, indeed they are. We even get to go into the facility of the Memory Police themselves. It wasn't quite what I expected, not only what it was, but that she was able to just walk right in. But let us begin with Chapter 9. As the winter deepened, the island was blanketed with heavy, stagnant air. We'll notice that weather, particularly snow, is becoming very prevalent on the island, and it is mentioned numerous times throughout these chapters. And the dark green trucks with canvas covers appeared more often on the streets. In the gap between the canvas and the bed of the truck, you could catch a glimpse of someone's shoe or a suitcase or the hem of a coat. And the methods used by the Memory Police were becoming more and more brutal. Everything happened by surprise, and they now carried heavy battering rams capable of breaking down any door. What are they after? Why are they so intense? We don't even really learn why yet. We do learn more what they're about. In fact, one of the Memory Police describes in intricate detail what they're about. But there had been no further widespread disappearances since the roses, but it became increasingly common to hear that someone had suddenly vanished. A friend from the next town, an acquaintance from school, a distant relative of the fishmonger. If on occasion a whole household suddenly went missing with no warning at all, the neighbors would simply pass their house with a furtive glance at the windows, hoping that the former inhabitants were safe somewhere. That was a little scene to set the stage, because now things are starting to really pick up. If you don't want to hear what I'm about to say, please tell me. What I'm going to tell you must be kept completely secret, and I need you to promise you'll do that. It could cost you your life itself. The little I have left, he said. I'd like to help someone, to hide them. And who is she going to hide? Well, she says it right here. He's my editor, the first person who reads my work. He's the friend who knows the self that I put in my novels better than anyone else. And immediately the man says, I understand, and I'll help you. Strangely enough, there's no argument. He just completely agrees right off the bat. But after discussing the matter, we decided that the safest option would be the little room where my father used to store his books and documents. And this was kind of interesting. On a blank page of his fairy log, the old man wrote down what each of us needed to do. First, the list for me. Number 1, clear out all books and documents remaining in the room since they related to birds they need to be disposed of carefully. Number 2, clean and disinfect everything. Hygiene will be important since no doctor can come to take care of R if he falls ill. 3, find a rug to conceal the trapdoor, plain and simple, not an elaborate design that might attract attention. 4, assemble basic necessities for R's everyday life. Extension cord, lamp, bedding, electrical kettle, tea service, etc. Avoid buying everything new. Large purchases attract attention. 5, plan a way to get R to my house unnoticed. This is the most important and most difficult. And then next, the list for the old man. Number 1, install ventilation fan. Room is too stuffy. 2, install plumbing to provide a minimum amount of running water. Find a way somehow. 3, line the room with thick paper to insulate and soundproof. 4, construct a toilet. A complicated project but needs to be done discreetly. 5, learn more about R. From now on, he won't have contact with anyone except the two of us. One thing I don't believe she really talked about is why all of a sudden she was adamant about hiding this man. Now, I know he is important to her because he is her editor, but it seems like a little more is going on. I don't know if she's kind of in love with him or kind of attracted to him or something, or if there's a parallel running with this real story the thing that's going on right now with him and her story about the typist. I don't know. I saw some parallels. Let me know what you think. Is there something going on even though we know R has a baby and a wife? Let's take a break and have a snack, the old man said at last. And I love this next part because, again, this is more of the wisdom that Ogawa bestows upon us. In general, he continued, most things you worry about end up being no more than that. Just worries. He put a large slice of cake on my plate. He still thought of me as a young, growing girl and invariably offered me too much to eat. And then to be rid of the evidence, the old man tore out a page and tossed it into the stove. Engulfed in flames, the paper shriveled and dissolved. Then the work begins the very next day. But the remodeling of the room proved to be a more difficult problem. It was rumored that all of the carpenters in the island had been recruited by the Memory Police. Of course, convenient. But not only that, they were instructed to alert them to any suspicious construction projects. But she enjoys the old man's work. It was wonderful to see how he went about his work. He was careful, precise, conscientious, and top of all that, quick. Because we know she doesn't have a lot of time here. To cover the noise from the construction, I played records of symphony music in my father's old office. What's cool about this is she describes his movements, right? Him using the tools in a tempo. The old man became adept at timing his work with a hammer or saw to correspond to the climax of a piece when all the instruments were playing together. So I think it's time for a montage, everybody. Not only is this, it's cool because it's, he's hammering to this thing in a musical way, but it's obviously to cover up the noise too. The project was finished in the evening on the fourth day. He ran a rubber tube from the office to the storeroom below and inserted funnels he had found in the kitchen in either end. By speaking into the funnels, you could talk without actually opening the trap door, as though on the telephone. The old man helped me as I struggled through the opening, because this is a very, very tiny, cramped place. And that brings us to chapter 10. Immediately, our narrator goes to R. I have a place to hide you. Please come with me. When we had finished our work, I made this declaration to R, being careful not to change my tone or expression, exactly as though I had been inviting him to dinner, because she can't let anyone be suspicious. And this is when we learn that not only does R have to hide, but he has a pregnant wife. I've already decided, he said, interrupting me. Decided what? I asked. I haven't told my wife anything. She's pregnant, and the baby will be born in a month. I can't go and leave her behind, and I can't take her with me. No one would be willing to hide a pregnant woman. No one knows what the future holds. Someday even the memory police are bound to disappear. Is that foreshadowing? I don't know. We'll see. But I had no idea you were planning this. I'm confused, said R. So she continues to coerce him. And besides, if you're arrested, what will become of the novel I'm writing? That I don't get. So we've definitely established there's a relationship between these two, a professional relationship. This seems very selfishly motivated, and I'm not sure why that is yet. We do see them become closer as R resides in this little cubbyhole, but I'm not sure where it's leading. I still have a theory that her being a writer is going to matter to some degree, and obviously she can't complete anything without him because he's her special editor. It seems you've got yourself mixed up in something quite dangerous on my account. No, it's just that I want to go on writing novels for you for a long time to come, and I need you as my editor. And now she describes her little plan. When you get to the station, I want you to buy the business newspaper at the kiosk and read it in front of the crepe shop just to your right after you leave the ticket gate. The shop will still be closed at that hour, but don't worry about it. Before long, an old man will approach you. He'll be wearing corduroy pants and a jacket and carrying a paper bag from a bakery. That will be the sign. Got some Mission Impossible action going on right here. And it was raining on Wednesday morning. Another mention of the weather. So it's raining now. It will be snowing very soon. I didn't know whether the rain would be good or bad for our plan. I'm not really sure it was either, other than the soggy buns that the gentleman had from the bakery that were inedible. So both the men come in, and so does this mean that my hiding place is your house? R asked. I would never have guessed. Really, R? Come on. You've seen this movie. And R let out a little gasp of surprise as I rolled up the carpet and lifted the trap door. Like a cave floating in the sky, he murmured. I'm afraid it isn't very comfortable, but as long as our friend is here to help us, everything should be fine. He can make just about anything you could need. I knew something was going to happen to the old man the second I read that line. But what did surprise me is that he was released. He came back. Is he a plant? Is he a spy? We shall find out. I closed the trapdoor and unrolled the rug, but for a moment I stood there frozen, staring down at my feet. I recalled the sound of his voice thanking me, a voice that seemed to rise slowly up as though from the depths of a swamp. Interesting choice of words, which brings us to chapter 11. 10 days had passed since R had taken refuge, but it was apparent that it would take longer still before we accustomed ourselves to this strange way of living. It would occur to me that R might be lonely and want someone to talk to, but then I'd reconsider, still holding the funnel at one end of our intercom, and conclude it would be better to leave him in peace. Eventually the days came to pass according to a fixed schedule. At 9 o'clock, I would bring the tray of his breakfast and a thermos of boiling water and knock on the trapdoor. During the visit, I would retrieve the empty water tank and refill it. Lunch was at 1. If R needed anything, he would give me a list and some money, and I would do the shopping when I went out for my walk in the evening. Mostly he asked for books, but there were other requests as well. Razor blades and nicotine gum, since the cramped quarters made smoking impossible. Notebooks, tonic water. Dinner was at 7. He bathed in the evening every other day, using a basin of hot water to wash himself, after which he had nothing to do but wait for the long night to pass. Are you feeling a little more settled? I asked him. A bit, thanks to all your kindness. If something's wrong, please tell me. No, everything's fine. but it seemed that he was not yet completely accustomed to this room. Well, come on, no kidding. 10 days, he's leaving his pregnant wife. It's his little tiny cramped space. Pretty obvious to me why he's not completely accustomed yet. They have some cookies and they have a little chat. How does it feel to remember everything? To have everything that the rest of us have lost saved up in your heart? That's a difficult question, he said, using his forefinger to push up the frame of his glasses and then leaving his hand at his throat. I'd imagine you'd be uncomfortable with your heart full of so many forgotten things. No, that's not really a problem. A heart has no shape, no limits. That's why you can put almost any kind of thing in it. Why it can hold so much. It's much like your memory in that sense. Now we're getting a little Murakami, a little Eastern, let's say. My memories don't feel as though they've been pulled up by the root. Even if they fade, something remains, like tiny seeds that might germinate again if the rain falls. And even if a memory disappears completely, the heart retains something, a slight tremor of pain, some bit of joy, a tear. So it's interesting here how they're separating memory from the heart. I know we say we learn things by heart, but really we mean by our head. But here they're definitely designating between the two things. Now here's a very odd passage. Kind of stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. A little bit creepy, a little odd, but here it is. I sometimes wonder what I'd see if I could hold your heart in my hands, I told him. I imagine it fitting perfectly in my palms, soft and slippery, like gelatin that hasn't quite set. It might wobble at the slightest touch, but I sense I'd need to hold it carefully so it wouldn't slip through my fingers. I also imagine the warmth of the thing. It's usually hidden deep inside, so it's much warmer than the rest of me. I close my eyes and sink into that warmth, and when I do, the sensation of all the things that have disappeared come back to me. I can feel all the things you remember there in my hands. Doesn't that sound marvelous? I don't know. It sounds pretty weird. If someone told me that, I might want to get out of this little cramped room they stuck me in, but he seems to be okay with it. And this is when we learn, I guess, a little bit of why she holds so much importance in him. But you have to admit that it's difficult to be a writer on the island. Words seem to retreat further and further away with each disappearance. I suspect the only reason I've been able to go on writing is that I've had your heart by my side all along. If I didn't know better, I would think I'm reading a romance novel. Well, I shouldn't say a novel, but things are getting romantic. And the next day, a call came from the publishing house, from the new editor who had taken over responsibility for my work. He was short and thin, a few years older than R. His face was so ordinary that it was difficult to make out the expression it wore. And he asked what's become of R, and she just flat out says he has disappeared. And while I think it's out of the ordinary, he doesn't really press her much more. And we decided it would be the old man's job to be in touch with R's wife. The toolbox on the back of his bicycle let him pass as a repairman, allowing him to visit her without attracting attention. Soon after R vanished, she went home to her parents' house to deliver the baby. But that plan had been made well in advance and had nothing to do with the recent developments. We decided to use the abandoned elementary school in the town as our point of contact. On the days ending in 0, the 10th, the 20th, the 30th, she would leave things she wanted to send to R in a wooden box in the courtyard that held meteorological instruments used by the children at the school. The old man would go on his bicycle to retrieve them, leaving items R wanted to send to his wife in their place. That was how we arranged things. Everything seems quieter in winter, no matter where you go, but that's the loneliest place I've ever seen, the old man reported after his first trip. As soon as I got over the hills, a cold wind hit me in the face. That must be right where the north wind starts to blow. The streets were nearly deserted, more cats around than people, and the houses were old and mostly empty. I expect folks moved away when they closed down the smelters, which look pretty spooky just sitting there, like crumbling rides at an amusement park. No matter where you go, there's another one, sad as can be, as though they died trapped in place by layers and layers of rust. And we do get a look at this abandoned elementary school later on when our narrator visits. How is R's wife? I asked. Tired as you'd expect. She told me she's having trouble understanding what's happened to her, but that's normal enough. Her husband's been snatched away just as she's about to give birth to her first child. But she's smart and tough, and she didn't try to find out where he is or who's hiding him. She just told me to say how grateful she is. And this is when we learn that she is going to stay with her parents, but also their pharmacy isn't doing so well. And there was no problem with the handoff at the box? Everything worked perfectly. The school is small and there was no one in sight. The whole place seems to have gone cold, with no lingering warmth or smell from the children, not so much as a footprint. It was freezing, like a laboratory of some sort. Not a place I wanted to hang around, so I came straight home. These were in the box. I took the package from him. It appeared to be several items of carefully folded clothing and a few magazines. The envelope was thick and tightly sealed. "Thank you," I said. I'm sorry to put you in so much danger." "No, that doesn't matter," he said, shaking his head. The cup was still pressed to his lips when I worried the cocoa would spill. "The important thing now is to get these things delivered." "You're right," I said. I clutched the packet and the envelope to my chest and started up the stairs, feeling the warmth of the old man's body still lingering in the objects. Which brings us to chapter 12. I was a bit surprised when he appeared for the first class I took at the typing school. Oh yeah, this is the section of writing. Again, the font has not changed. He did not look anything like a typing teacher. What does a typing teacher look like? For one thing, for no good reason perhaps, I had it in my head that typing teachers were always women of a certain age, with an overly polite way of speaking, heavy makeup, and bony fingers. But I found instead a very young man, one of average build, dressed in well-cut clothing in understated colors. He looked like a law professor or a preacher, perhaps rightly so, since we were in a church, or an industrial engineer. But he was, in fact, a typing teacher, one who knew just about everything there was to know about typing. I will definitely give her credit here because this is kind of a cool scene. It's kind of funny, but it's also neat because there's a romance developing between these two, as we know. And she describes typing in almost a sensual manner, as we find out. But I never once saw him actually using a typewriter, though. He merely circulated among the students, commenting on the position of our fingers or the way we handled the machine, and then marking the mistakes on our practice sheets with a red pen. And for a long time I have wanted to watch him in the act of typing. It must be very beautiful to see the glittering, carefully maintained machine, snow-white paper, his perfectly straight back, his expertly placed fingers. The very thought of it made me sigh, or swoon. But I've never yet seen him type, even now that we have become lovers. He never types in front of other people. It happened about 3 months after I'd started attending the typing classes. A heavy snow had fallen that day, the most I'd ever seen. The buses and trains were stopped and the whole town was buried. And in the end, I was the only one who made it to class that day. We've all seen this movie, right? Of course we have. Of course we have. It was particularly quiet that day, perhaps because of the snow. Again, not only are we mentioning the weather in the actual story, but we're mentioning it in the story within the story. I sat down at the fourth typewriter from the window. We had a rule that the first to arrive could choose any machine she wanted, since each had its idiosyncrasies, sticky keys or worn-out letters. Usually he would sit at his desk near the blackboard, but that day he stood near me. And I grew more and more tense and made one mistake after another. And this is when he takes her finger and starts typing E. He had taken hold of the barest tip of my finger, but I was so overwhelmed, as if he had taken me in his arms. The tapping of the key striking the paper was the only sound in the room. The bell in the clock tower began to chime. 5 o'clock. The vibration came from far below, rattling the window glass and passing through our bodies before being absorbed by the snow below. The only motion was the falling of the snowflakes. I held my breath, unable to move, as though locked inside the typewriter. Interesting scene. It's a cool way to create a tension of lust, of attraction. I enjoyed reading that. But from that point on, I decided to have R read my manuscript before showing it to the new editor. Needless to say, he could no longer write comments in the margins, but we discussed every detail of the work as we always had, there in the secret room. Since there was just one chair, we would sit next to each other on the bed, using the back cover of a sketchbook as a makeshift table for the manuscript. I don't know, guys, what do you think? Do you think that she's going to fall in love with him, or do you think he's going to fall in love with her? I feel like, if anything, she's going to fall in love with him. It's funny because the way she acts toward him changes quite a bit. I feel like it's like this here, right, where she's getting a little bit cozy with him, and then later on in the sections of chapters we're reading this time, she kind of looks at him as if he's a withering away old man. And this is when he asks her to do some work. And there's some crazy story about polishing silverware that we'll get to soon. And she's kind of taken aback. He says, "Would you mind finding me some sort of work to do? I'd like to contribute what I can, and besides, it would help me pass the time." So he wants to feel like he's valued in some way other than just editing her manuscript. And he held the tray in both hands and looked down at the food arranged on it. As he spoke, little ripples ran across the surface of the potato soup. I really like that image. There's a lot of moments like that in this book where it breaks up the scene. It paces it out in an interesting way. There's moments of pause, of silence, and I think that really helps with the cinematography of these scenes, and I'm really enjoying it. And she apologizes that it's the same soup every day, and he says, "Not at all, it's delicious. That's the first time anyone has ever complimented my cooking. Thank you. And my thanks to you for finding me something to do. Not at all. Good night then. Until tomorrow." Thus it was that supplying him with work came to be added to my daily tasks. They were all simple jobs: organizing receipts, sharpening pencils, recopying my address book, putting page numbers on my manuscripts, but he eagerly took them all on. But quite apart from the small satisfaction we enjoyed, the world outside was deteriorating day by day. The disappearances, which had slowed down after the roses, returned with two in quick succession: first photographs and then fruits of all sorts. I kind of laughed right there because we've seen that things have been more or less specific. Photographs, roses, and now it's fruits of all sorts. I don't know why, it just kind of caught me off guard. But as I was gathering all the albums and photos in the house, including the portrait of my mother on the mantelpiece, to burn them in the garden incinerator, R made a desperate effort to stop me. "Photographs are precious. They preserve memories. If you burn them, there's no getting them back. You mustn't do this. Absolutely not." "But what can I do? The time has come for them to disappear," I told him. "If their photographs are gone, how will you remember your parents' faces?" he asked, looking deeply troubled. "It's their photographs that will disappear, not my mother and father," I said. "I'll never forget their faces. They may be nothing more than scraps of paper, but they capture something profound. Light and wind and air, the tenderness or joy of the photographer, the bashfulness or pleasure of the subjects. You have to guard these things forever in your heart. That's why photographs are taken in the first place. But even if you can't resist them, meaning the disappearances, you don't have to burn your photographs. Important things remain important things, no matter how much the world changes," said R. "Their essence doesn't change. If you keep them, they're bound to bring you something in return. I don't want to see any more of your memories lost." "No," I said, shaking my head wearily. "Nothing comes back now when I see a photograph. No memories, no response. They're nothing more than pieces of paper. A new hole has opened in my heart, and there's no way to fill it up again. That's how it is when something disappears, though I suppose you can't understand." He looked down, his eyes sad. The disappearance of fruit was much simpler. When we woke in the morning, fruit of every sort was falling from trees all over the island. A pattering sound could be heard everywhere, and in the northern hills and the forest park, fruit came down like a hailstorm. Then, before long, the snow began to fall, covering all the fruit. Which brings us to chapter 13. It was the first time in ages that the snow had fallen. And here we go. Snow is falling as their relationship develops in the story. Not in this story, but in the story within the story. And now snow is falling in the story we're reading. The hunt for memories became a daily activity in the midst of the snowstorm. The memory police roamed the town in trench coats and boots. Sometimes the memory police would appear in the middle of the night, completely surrounding a whole block with their trucks and search every house without exception. And here we are. One day, out of the blue, the old man was taken by the memory police. "I'm sure they'll be coming soon. We've got to hide you somewhere safer, but where?" R sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders. As the warmth of his hand worked its way to my skin, I trembled harder and harder, unable to stop myself, even though I knew he meant his touch to soothe me. "The first thing we need to do is calm down." "But why did they take the old man?" "You can't think of any reason? Had he been stopped in the street while he was carrying something suspicious? Or the memory police come to search the old boat?" "No, nothing like that," I said, staring at the tips of my fingers, which were still numb despite his gentle care. "So then don't worry. The investigation probably has nothing to do with me. They're always gathering information. They round up anyone and question him or her about anything at all." I wondered how long we sat there. As the heat of his body warmed me, the trembling gradually subsided. Finally, I pulled free of his embrace and stood up. The next day, without consulting R, I decided to pay a visit to the headquarters of the memory police. So this is finally when we get to see the facility. I thought it was going to be different. I kind of appreciate what she did here with the fact that she could just walk in. It makes it almost more ominous that way, creepier. The guards were posted on either side of the entrance, their legs slightly apart, hands crossed behind their backs, eyes staring straight ahead. I wonder if I could ask a question. Having summoned my courage, I addressed the guard on the right. "I've come to see someone and deliver a few things to him, and I'd like to know where I should go." And they don't say anything, and so she goes right in. Inside, the hall was dim with an enormous high ceiling. A number of officers dressed in the familiar uniforms paced back and forth across the room. There were also a few outsiders hurrying along with tense looks on their faces, but no voices could be heard, No sound of laughter, nor was there any music playing, just the ringing of heels against the hard floor. And we see here an officer was seated at the desk, utterly absorbed in something he was writing. Deciding this must be the reception area, I took a deep breath and approached him. I have a package I'd like to deliver to an acquaintance. My voice trailed off, echoing from the ceiling before being lost in the vastness of the hall. Package? He paused, twirling his pen in his fingers, and he repeated the word as though trying to recall the meaning of some rarely used philosophical term. And she asked to see him, but he says, I'm afraid he's not here. But how can you be sure if you haven't even checked? And this guy's job apparently is to know every single person that is checked in here. This is our headquarters, but we have a branch office in many other places. The only thing I can tell you is that the person you are looking for is not here. And his papers were thickly covered with numbers and letters in a script I did not understand. I thought that was kind of cool. So they got some kind of secret language, secret code they're using here. You don't understand how it works, he murmured, glancing at someone or something behind me. It was the subtlest of gestures, but in an instant 2 officers appeared and stood on either side of me. These men wore fewer badges on their chests, so I assumed they must be of lower rank than the officer at the desk. After that, I was hurried to the elevator, an officer on either side, and then guided through the maze of corridors and into a room at the heart of the building. I'm sorry you've gone to the trouble of coming all this way through the snow, but both visits and packages are forbidden. The man who had come to sit across from me was short and slender, but the elaborate insignias and medals on his chest seemed to indicate he was quite important. You have no need to worry. Your friend has plenty to eat and a warm room to sleep in, the man said, ignoring my offerings. He's an old man whose memories disappear right on schedule. He spends his days doing almost nothing at all. Surely you can't have any reason to keep him here. That's for us to determine. Then can you tell me what you've decided? You have a talent for asking the impossible, young lady. The man pressed his finger against his temples. Most of what we do here must be kept secret. That's the nature of our work. I suppose your rules also prevent you from telling me when he'll be able to go home? And this is when we get a very elaborate description of what these people do. Indeed they do, the man said, smiling and recrossing his legs. You catch on quickly. The tassel from one of his medals on his chest shook. Our primary function here is to assure that there are no delays in the process, and that useless memories disappear quickly and easily. I'm sure you'd agree that there's no point in holding on to them. If your big toe became infected with gangrene, you cut it off as soon as you can. If you do nothing, you end up losing the whole leg. The principle is the same. The only difference is that you can't touch or see memories, or get inside the hearts they're kept in. Each one of us hides them away in secret. So, since our adversary is invisible, we are forced to use our intuition. It is extremely delicate work. In order to unmask these invisible secrets, to analyze and sort and dispose of them, we must work in secret to protect ourselves. I think you can understand. And he stopped his monologue here and began tapping the table with his fingers. Interesting analogy about memories and gangrene. I came to the conclusion that it would be useless to inquire further about the old man, clearly. Now then, said the man, taking a sheet of paper from a drawer in the table, it's my turn to ask you some questions. That was the moment I began to regret having come. The more information I provided, the closer they would be to our, things are getting complicated. Please, the man said, nodding to the tea, before it gets cold. Thank you, I murmured, but at the first sip, I knew it wasn't the tea I was drinking. The smell and the flavor were subtly different, and nothing I'd ever consumed. A mixture of bitter and sour, as though brewed from dried leaves piled up on a forest floor. The taste was bearable, but it took considerable courage to swallow that first sip, since I was all but certain it was drugged. Was it a poison to make me sleep, so they could extract my secrets, or a solution that would allow them to analyze my genes? Or who knew what else? So the conversation I had with R way back when they were sitting around a table talking about her book is coming back to haunt her. The man stared at me from across the table, and I could feel the eyes of the men by the door as well. I drained the cup in silence and then handed him the completed form. Excellent, he said, glancing down at the page with a slight smile as he returned the pen to his pocket. The tassel on his medal brushed back and forth. It snowed again that night. They're sitting here, talking to each other through this little telephone conduit they have. I like the sound of R's voice through the makeshift speakers, like a spring bubbling up from far below me. As it traversed the long rubber tube between the two funnels, all unnecessary sounds faded away, leaving only the soft, transparent liquid of his voice. That's a cool description. I pressed my ear against the funnel, unwilling to waste even a single drop. And this is when he laments not knowing what's going on outside, not seeing the weather, not feeling the weather, not hearing the weather. If it keeps up like this, I'll have to shovel the walk in the morning, I said, reaching out to part the curtains a bit wider. Trucks from the town hall had come every Monday and Thursday to collect the snow. They dump it into the sea at the harbor near the old man's boat. They throw it into the sea. I didn't know that. It's the perfect place. But I've watched from the wheelhouse on the boat, and I always wonder what happens to it after it vanishes into the waves. I suspect it melts almost immediately, R said. Melts and mixes with the salt water, and then onto the fishes and the seaweed. And this is when they have an interesting conversation about her being a young girl and talking about sleep and taking a bunch of sleeping pills, and I thought that was going to result in something a little darker, but it did not. When I was a child, I was drawn to the mystery of sleep. I imagined it as a land with no homework, no bad meals, no organ lessons, no pain or self-denial or tears. When I was 8 years old, I was thinking of running away from home. I no longer remember why. The reason was probably something insignificant, a bad grade on a test, or the fact that I was always one in class who couldn't do a pull-up. I decided to run away in search of the land of sleep. That was quite a plan for an 8-year-old. I found a bottle of sleeping pills in a drawer on my father's desk. I'd seen him take a pill every night before I went to bed. I don't remember how I took that day. So what happened? R asked, his tone careful. Nothing really. I slept, of course, but there was no world of sleep. Just darkness stretching out in every direction. No, that doesn't quite capture it. It wasn't even darkness. There was nothing at all. No air or noise or gravity, not even me to experience them. Just overwhelming nothingness. The pills didn't make you sick? On the contrary, I felt refreshed after so much sleep, which made the whole thing worse. Perhaps they weren't sleeping pills at all, but just vitamins or something. In any case, I never made it to the land of sleep or anywhere else, like the snow vanishing into the sea. The night had deepened and my hand had grown cold, holding the funnel. The flame in the stove was wavering, the fuel having run low. Would you like me to hold the funnel by the window so you can hear the snow falling? I stood up to the window. The cold was sharper than I'd imagined, and it stung my cheeks. The tube was not long enough, but I pulled it out as far as it would go to bring the outside air to R. How's that? I asked. The snow falling into the room collected in my hair. I can feel it. I can feel the snow. His quiet words were absorbed into the night. Which brings us to chapter 14, the final chapter of this video. The old man was released 3 days later. Big surprise to me. I thought this plot was going to go a little bit deeper, but again, he could be a double agent. He could be a spy. But I had stopped back to check on the boat during my usual evening walk and found him stretched out on the bed in the first-class cabin he used as his room. When did you get back? I asked him, kneeling by the bed. Oh, this morning, he answered, his voice hoarse and weak. His face was pale, his beard had grown out, and his lips were covered with scabs. I'm so glad you're safe, I said, stroking his hair and cheeks. I'm sorry I worried you. That doesn't matter. How are you feeling? Are you injured? Should I take you to the hospital? No, I'm fine. Just a little tired, so I've been lying down. Are you sure? Then you must be hungry. Hold on a minute. I'll make you something. I patted his chest through the blanket. But what did they do to you? Don't worry. They don't know anything about the room. I'm sure of that at least. Their attention is focused on a smuggling incident. Smuggling? At the end of last month, some men took a boat and escaped from the Cape by the lighthouse. They were fleeing the memory police. No, the people they were hunting haven't forgotten anything. The sound of the engine, the smell of the fuel, the shape of the waves as the boat glides through them. Did they think you had helped them somehow? Yes. It seemed they brought in everyone who knew anything about boats. But how did they manage to get the boat ready without the memory police finding out? I don't know the details, but I think they must have secretly repaired a boat that was left in the shipyard. They wouldn't have had the right tools or parts. The memory police stripped out all the engines when the boats disappeared, broke them in pieces, and threw them into the sea. They probably had to make do with all sorts of improvised parts. That's what the police were asking me about. Technical things about ships, but of course I didn't help them since I don't remember anything at all. Of course. How many do you think there were? I don't really know, but I'm sure it was more than a boat was intended to hold. There must be more than one boatload of people trying to get off the island. And this is when she imagines what it's like for these people on this boat to get off the island, something that she never thought of. Rather than hiding in houses, these people are trying to escape the island, which was thought to be an impossibility. I wonder if they got away safely, I said. I'm sure they managed to get off the island, but the seas are rough in winter. It's possible they vanished without a trace. But where do you think they were going? You can't see anything beyond the horizon, I said, pointing out at the sea. I don't know. Maybe there's a place out there where people whose hearts aren't empty can go on living. Then he folded the napkin and set it on the blanket. In addition to the old man's return, there was another happy event to celebrate. R's child was born, a baby boy 6.5 pounds. Since the old man had not completely recovered, I was making his regular trip to the elementary school myself. This is when we get a cool look at it. The playground was an untouched field of snow. On my right were a horizontal bar, a seesaw, and a basketball hoop. On the left, several hutches that must have held rabbits or some other animal, but which were empty now, of course. Ahead of me was a school building, 3 stories high with evenly spaced windows. Everything that had lost its purpose seemed to have been gathered together right there. This whole scene is pretty cool, right? It really speaks the silence of this location. She even, I remember, wants to look back at her footprints because the snow is so perfect. It looked wrong. But she approaches the box. A neat package bound in twine, small enough to fit in my 2 palms, underwear, some paperbacks, a small box of candy, and tucked on top, a picture of a baby. Who could have drawn it? I picked it up and studied it, a portrait of a baby with its eyes closed, drawn in colored pencil on a heavy piece of paper the size of a postcard, because, of course, photographs have disappeared. And a note from R's wife was written on the back. The baby was born on the 12th at 4:46 a.m. The midwife said it would be the easiest birth she'd assisted with in her entire career. He's doing fine. He peed almost as soon as they set him down by my belly. I bought him both pink and blue bottoms for his clothes, and today I sewed the blue ones on everything. Please don't worry about us. We're waiting, hoping for the day when you'll be able to take him into your arms. Please take care of yourself. Back at home, I opened the trapdoor to the hidden room without knocking. R was busy at his desk and seemed not to notice as he continued to work on the task I'd given him the day before, polishing all the silverware in the house. Was it an illusion, or had his body actually begun to shrink since he had hidden himself away here? He had definitely grown pale, without any contact of sunlight, and his appetite was poor, so he'd lost weight. But what I sensed was not the sort of tangible changes, but some more abstract transformation. Every time I saw him, I could feel the outline of his body blurring, his blood thinning, his muscles withering. So I'm not sure if this has anything to do with her feelings for him, because now that she's seen the baby, clearly she's been snapped out of her reverie, if she was in one anyway. And this was kind of out there. I recall the Circus Freak show I had once seen profiled on television. There was a shot of a wooden box that held a young girl who had been sold to the show. Her head protruded from a hole, but her arms and legs must have been folded tightly inside. She had been forced to pass months and then years in the state, never released even to eat or sleep. In time, her arms and legs would have frozen in place, and she was exhibited to the public as a kind of deformed human insect. I'm getting some Junji Ito vibes here, which is kind of cool. Maybe we'll get some horrific elements. I doubt it. And we have her remembering the silverware. And no matter how carefully R polished it, I knew it was unlikely I would ever have occasion to use it again. So the reality of that is setting in. Never again would there be guests, nor parties to invite them to, nor was my grandmother alive to prepare food worthy of these elegant utensils. Can I bother you for a few minutes? I asked him. Of course, he replied. Come and sit with me here. I tiptoed through the silver on the floor and sat down on the bed. There are some valuable pieces here, he said. Things you could never find now. He made half a turn in his chair to face me. Do you think so? My mother loved them at any rate. The more care you take with them, the more gratifying they are. Gratifying? How so? The film of age gets peeled away and their luster returns. It isn't grand, but something humble, even solitary. When you hold them in your hands, it seems as though you're holding light itself. I feel they're telling me a story. And this is when we get this interesting story from our narrator here. I've heard that wealthy families used to employ whole teams of servants just to keep the silver polished, I continued. I imagine them working all day and night in a stone building off the courtyard with no other job than polishing. There would have been a long, narrow table in the middle of the room, and the servants sat on both sides with their daily quota of polishing stacked in front of them. They were strictly forbidden to speak, lest their breath cloud the silver, so the work took place in absolute silence. The room was always chilly, and even in the middle of the day, the sun never shone in, meaning that the sole source of light was a single sputtering lamp. Apparently, it was only possible to tell them the silver had been properly polished by viewing it in the lowest of lights. The slightest smudge would mean starting over from the beginning. That sucks. And a doubling of the next day's quota for the servant, which would keep him polishing through the next night. But I'm sorry, this isn't the right time or place for the story. No, not at all. I'm afraid I've bored you. Anything but, he said, shaking his head. And up close, I could see even more clearly how frail R had grown. So it's interesting to think about this because She's protecting him, but she's also causing him to wither away, or at least she thinks he's causing that. So she's in a bit of a dilemma, right? She could either risk him going to a safe house somewhere and then being caught by the memory police, or slowly, literally disappear on his own in this little cubbyhole of an apartment she's built for him. And she continues with the story here. The thing I found most surprising, I said, taking up the story, was that over time the servants who did this work lost the power of speech. After many long days, dawn and dusk, rubbing their cloths in that stone room, they actually became mute. They had no fear of clouding the silver with their words, for even after they finished work and left the room, they could no longer recall the sound of their own voices. And it would be terrible if you lost your voice. No danger there, he replied. You forget, I'm the one who never loses anything. I see what you mean, I said. Our eyes met and we smiled. When it was time to leave, I gave him the things his wife had left in the box at the school. He looked at the baby's picture in silence. I thought I should say something, but I couldn't think of what it would be. Congratulations, I said at last, unable to stand the silence. Of course, photographs have already disappeared, he murmured. Photographs? I said, not understanding what he meant. Then after repeating the word to myself, I finally realized I had a vague memory that there had once been smooth pieces of paper that captured someone's image. Well, that was quite the ending. We have our narrator in a bit of a dilemma. She's trying to save her editor for it appears to be her own selfish means, right? To continue to work on her books because she thinks that without him, she wouldn't be able to go on. But even though she is protecting him very closely, she's watching him slowly wither away inside this tiny box of a room. And though we got to see a drawing of his newborn son, it's kind of sad because photographs are gone. So even though this is better than nothing, it's a depiction of a son, it's not a photograph. It's not really him. And also the old man, he was taken in but let go about, 3 days later. I'm thinking he is a double agent of some kind. I think he's a spy. It all seemed too easy. But let me know what you think. How are you liking the book so far? Do you have any predictions yourselves? Drop them down in the comments. And I will see you next week with chapters 15 through 19 of The Memory Police. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for reading along with me, and I will see you then. Bye.